Here. So welcome everyone. This is New Hampshire Housing's presentation of From the Outskirts to Downtown Taxes, Land Use, and Value Analysis of two Southwest communities. I'm Todd Horner, a planner with Southwest Region Planning Commission. This event is presented by New Hampshire Housing, which is a self-sustaining corporation created under New Hampshire statute with a mission to promote, finance, and support affordable housing for our state. Part of what housing professionals do is think creatively about policy alternatives that will help to promote housing development and housing affordability. The creation of new homes is an essential part of the Granite State's economic development future. In order to help expand thinking within the Granite State and how land use is connected with important issues like housing and the economy, New Hampshire Housing partnered with the Asheville-based firm Urban3 to conduct a statewide study on the fiscal productivity of different types of development. We recognize that Urban3's approach could have great utility in many communities throughout New Hampshire, as communities wrestle with questions of how to promote certain forms of land use through their zoning ordinances to achieve the best outcomes. Urban3 analyzed 15 communities across the Granite State, large and small, from the seacoast to the North Conway and the Upper Valley area. Joe will present the results of his work in the Southwest region communities of Keene and Peterborough. This presentation is being recorded and we'll share links to the video and presentation with registrants tomorrow. Joe's presentation today will last about an hour and we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. Please enter your questions in the chat box and we'll get to as many of them as time allows. Before I introduce Joe, I want to thank our sponsors. Craig Deachman Associates, RBC, and TD Bank. We are grateful for their support. I'd like to take a moment to tell you a little bit about Southwest Region Planning Commission and our interest in helping bring this presentation to the region. SWRPC is one of 9 regional planning commissions established across the state of New Hampshire. Our region covers a 34-town area in Cheshire, Western Hillsborough, and Sullivan counties. Our primary role is to provide technical support to our member municipalities. We work on a wide range of issues, including transportation, housing, economic development, environmental conservation, and more. Most, if not all, of the issues that we focus on in SWRPC connect in some way to how land is developed, used, and managed, a topic that lies at the center of tonight's presentation. Urban3's work may help us reassess which types of development best support the long-term economic security of our communities, while simultaneously achieving other important goals like promoting housing options, transportation alternatives, and protection of natural resources. I know I personally found Urban3's analysis thought-provoking, and I'm confident that you will too. And a big thank you to the 15 communities who are part of Urban3's analysis, especially staff from Keene and Peterborough who helped promote the event and are part of the audience. And now to our speaker, Joe Minicosi, is the principal of Urban3. Prior to creating Urban3, he served as the executive director for the Asheville Downtown Association. Joe is an urban planner, imagining new ways to think about and visualize land use, urban design, and economics. Joe founded Urban3 to explain and visualize market dynamics created by tax and land use policies. Joe holds a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Miami and a Master of Architecture in Urban Design from Harvard University. In 2017, Joe was recognized as one of the 100 most influential urbanists of all time. So Joe, welcome virtually to the Southwest region of New Hampshire. I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Todd, and thanks for having me. And it's great to have thanks for giving me a chance to come back after the last computer failure. So hopefully this is all going to be working just fine. And let's get started with the show. So we're known for these computer models, the way that we do economic analysis of cities to visualize the information. And I'm going to go through a lot of data tonight, but really what I'd like to do is put an idea or an analogy up front about why do we look at cities across the spectrum and how do we look at them and compare them. And the easiest analogy that I like to give to people is think of towns and villages and hamlets and cities of all having some form of DNA, much like the way that I have DNA. So this is how I started life when I actually had hair, and this is my path. So I'm going to be my grandfather whether I like it or not, or more importantly, I'm going to be this guy, my father. And there's not a lot I can do to change my trajectory to be my parents. And the older I get, the more I start to see their habits and genetic materials showing up in me. The same is true of cities. So what are the good habits that you can emulate and build upon, or what are some of the less positive aspects that you have to deal with? So in my family, I'm Italian. There's not a lot I can do to change that. But we also have a genetic predisposition to heart disease. So my dad had a 7 bypass heart surgery. Every Minicozy man has had that issue in their bloodline. So I have it, and I could ignore that, or I could exercise, I could eat right, I could do things that minimize that impact. So the same is true of towns, cities, and villages. Learn from other places and learn what you can do to grow forward. So this is my lesson. I'm going to show you some examples, but first let's talk about Asheville, where I currently live. This is Asheville, what not a lot of people know about. This is the Asheville that was boarded up and essentially destitute after the Depression, and for a long time, for 50 years, we were the highest debt per capita city of the entire United States when the Depression hit, and we essentially mothballed until the 90s, and that's a 1996 Chevy Celebrity. And we had this attitude that we're not urban people, we're rural mountain people, we're not Boston, go away with your urban ideas, and we're just going to forget about it. And because we actually had this building stock, we could actually do something with it. And there was a lot of people that did things, including the city, by investing in streetscape projects and fixing the public realm. On the private side, we had private investors that came in. And this is Julian Price. I used to work for Julian's company. We're actually still in their office. Public Interest Projects is a for-profit real estate development company. And Julian invested $15 million into creating a for-profit real estate development company. So our job was essentially fixing buildings with 75% of that money, and 25% of the money we would seed entrepreneurs. So we'd invest in small businesses to fill out the ground floor, to make the street life active. And they're paying rent, but they're also making the city more alive so that people would want to live there. So you have to do both. You have to grow the street life, but you have to provide places for people to live. And so the buildings that were here were incredible housing stock. This was an old hotel that was essentially, screened in with aluminum, and we exposed it to be small apartments. These are 400 to 500 square foot apartments, and they booked up like hotcakes. This was 99% leased up before the doors were open. So this is about providing opportunity for people. I might not want to live in a 400 to 500 square foot apartment, but there's somebody that wants that. So giving those choices in your community are what cities have always done, and towns and villages even. So it's providing that, and the data is there to support it. But what we found is that no one was talking about the information. No one was talking about the data. We were having emotional arguments about what we thought cities should be, or how we felt about cities, or what we thought should happen. And it wasn't a data-driven discussion. So looking at our downtown, we're a $15 million investor, and our downtown was worth $100 million in 1990. We didn't get a new building in downtown until 2008. So this is the value of historic preservation. Or another way of looking at it is that $500 million was just sitting here in that $100 million state. We just didn't use it. So by renovating those upper stories that were all vacant, we essentially added value to the community of building stock that was already here. We mined revenue. Now to show you that it's not all love and roses in Asheville, these are some campaign ads from the 90s when the city started doing the streetscape work. And this is from one of my favorite people, Chris Peterson, and he was actually a city councilor. And these are his campaign flyers complaining about the $26 million of streetscape projects, parking garages, things like that. I like on the right, you can see it says downtown parking fiasco, millions of dollars wasted. Well, no one's here yet. So it takes a while to fill up those parking decks. Now, well, outside of COVID, before COVID, it was impossible to find parking in downtown. So this is how we had to build that stuff for our city. But Chris is right, $26 million is a lot of money. But I don't have $26 million. But if you look at this this chart here, if you have $100 million and you invest 26 and you yield 430 million to get to 500, is investing $26 million and yielding 430, is that a good return on investment? Yes. So why aren't we talking about that? Why aren't we celebrating that? Why are we letting Chris steal all the airspace with his opinion on things without looking at the facts? And are you going to reach Chris? Probably not. You know, now he's got a website with fire and brimstone, striking the mayor in the head. I think that's pretty funny. I asked the mayor, I said, hey, Mayor, is that a liquor drink? She goes, yeah, it should be. You know, Chris is entitled to his opinion. He's not entitled to facts. So it's our job to put that information out there is for the civic level to talk about the facts and data and understand what cities are, that we're all in this together. So we're a $15 million investor in a multi-billion dollar municipality that's essentially a finite area of land that has to be managed. So the area of the land is the area of the land. You know, the same is true for your county and your state. You know, you can't annex the next state over. You know, the land that you have is fixed. So if you look up the definition of incorporate in the Oxford American Dictionary, it tells you that incorporate means to constitute a company, a city, or other organization as legal corporation. So by law, your city, your county, your town, your village, they're all corporations. They're just, you know, they're just different levels of real estate development. In fact, Joe Biden said this on the Stephen Colbert Show back in 2016. He said the United States is the largest corporation in the world. And I'm such a nerd. Look, the bottom right-hand side of the slide there, you can see that's the US code that lists us as a federal corporation. So by law, we're a corporation. We're not a capitalist corporation. We're a social corporation. In fact, we're running our real estate. So at $14 billion is the taxable value of my city. That's 6 times the value of Ted Turner. Do you think Ted Turner wakes up every single day and just looks at Facebook and makes his decisions that way? Of course not. He's looking at data. He's trying to understand what's going on at an economic level, and he's making his decisions based off of facts and data. So we need to do the same thing with our city, but first we need to understand what our product is. What are we growing? And how does land produce wealth and revenue? So if you talk to any farmer, farmers are always talking about land in economic terms. What's the crop yield per acre, the water per acre, the labor per acre? All that it's economics of their land unit, which is the only thing that they have is their farm. So if we're to look at our farm and look at the crops, this is one of the crops. So we did a renovation on this building. We did ground floor retail, second floor office, and upper stories residential. The city did the streetscape project. So thank you, city, for the garbage can, the bike rack, 2 benches, and a street tree. That's awesome. Chris thinks that was our subsidy. Fine. So that $25,000 of investment at our front door, we didn't pay for it. Awesome. But we took the taxable value from $300,000 to $11 million. So the taxes that the community gets, that you get, are 3,500% more money. So do you have a 401k plan that grows by that much? Or do you have a bond that grows by that much, or a CD? No. So that's how you grow community wealth. Go out and buy 3,500% more garbage cans. I don't care. You know, the funny thing is how the biases of how people react to stuff like this. And immediately they're like, well, Joe, that's cute and everything. That's $11 million, but we've got this Walmart that's 20 million. Fair enough. That's double the value. I get it. But it's really not a fair way of looking at it, because that's 34 acres of our farm that takes up versus our 0.2 acres. So it's really an apples and oranges comparison. If you want to make it apples to apples, what is the per acre yield on both of these crops? So we're producing 100 times more property taxes than they are. We're producing double the retail taxes. Who would have thought that a furniture store, a tattoo shop, and a beauty salon are twice as retail productive as a Walmart? They are. That's a fact. We've got residents, they don't, and we also have more jobs. So pound for pound, dollar for dollar, this stuff in our downtown is more productive. That's the math, that's the data, that's the evidence. So do more of it. You know, lots of times, like, people are just like, well, Joe, you just hate Walmart. Like, that's your problem. It's like, no. Let me tell you a story about Walmart for a second. I presented at the International Association of Tax Assessing Officers conference, which is probably the squarest conference that I've ever presented at. It makes a planning conference feel like Burning Man. It's the weirdest thing. But these people are super awesome. They're doing incredible work. And this guy got up and presented on the Walmart portfolio and showed spreadsheet after spreadsheet on how cheap Walmarts are. And all the assessors are taking notes. And I'm thinking, this is brilliant. This guy's getting all of his property taxes lowered in one meeting. There's 3,000 assessors in the room, and he's presenting how to devalue his properties. Now don't hate the assessors for this. He's making their job easier. What's their job? Is to put value on things. They can't call Walmart something that it isn't. So if it's a cheap building, it's a cheap building. It's that simple. So I went up to the microphone and I asked him, I said, Mr. Terrell, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he shot back 15, 20 years, that we designed the building to depreciate as fast as possible. We'll get out of that building and go to another one. If the buildings are throwaway for us. We want to maximize depreciation. So let that wash over you for a second. When you have a property tax-based system, there's a perverse incentive to build junk. The average Walmart consumes more in property taxes or more in police services than it pays in property taxes. You can Google that online. You can find that. Talk to your police chief. Like, you can find this information out. Why do we let it happen? And this isn't to blame Walmart. Don't hate the player, hate the game. And so, just if it works for you, if it makes sense for you, if 15 years is good, then that's the life cycle of a cat. Great. We least more in the passing of a cat. Now, I'm saying this joke. I'm a dog person, but I'm using this to drive home the point. We need to be consciously making these decisions with the information so that we know what's best for our community. And if it's good to have that limited life cycle, awesome. But we need to be doing the math on this stuff, and it's not that complex. It's really simple. So when we look at cars, if we were to talk about cars, we don't say, how many miles per tank do we get? Because we'd all be driving Ford F-150s at 650 miles per tank. That's kind of silly because all tanks are different sizes. And you say, Joe, it's not per tank, it's per gallon. And when you say miles per gallon, the numbers change, and we should all be driving BMW Isettas. I didn't even change the vehicles on this page. So we understand comparative analytics to understand productivity in cars for $2 a gallon commodity. We certainly should be doing it for $30,000 a gallon or an acre commodity. And land is more limited. You can't make another city or another town or another village or another county. You got what you got. So if you look across the entire, we did all from Driggs, Idaho to Durham, North Carolina, and Durham, New Hampshire. If you look across this whole model, this is how it looks. So for every dollar of county taxes somebody's paying out in the county to county taxes per acre, they're paying about 5 times that to the city. The Walmart's just a little bit above that. Then you've got your Walmart, your mall. But look at Main Street. As soon as you get to a 2-story building, and it jumps up, and then a 3-story building, and then a 6-story building. You see this proportional growth as you start to stack the stories. It gets really valuable, and that's the lesson of what our tax system does. So understand that you're essentially stacking your dollar bills as you stack your stories. So now what? Well, one of the things that we like to specialize in is if you can see what's going on in your brain and your creative thought processes, the green stuff versus your brainstem activity and the blue stuff. Can you do an economic MRI? Can we visualize the economics to show you what's happening in your community? And these are the models that we love to do. This is actually Hennepin County, which is home to Minneapolis. So this is the entire county, but you can see Minneapolis shooting off the map in the model. So how do we do that? Here's Asheville again. This is my county, Buncombe County, 350 square miles. The big gray area at the upper right, that's Mount Mitchell. The gray area at the lower left, that's Mount Pisgah. Those are the 2 tallest mountains east of the Mississippi, part of the Blue Ridge Parkway. So they're non-taxable. It's a big federal park. Don't pay me taxes. We just gray them out. They're not paying taxes. The green stuff is the lowest level value. The purple stuff is the highest value. So you see that big purple splotch down there. That's the Biltmore estate. That one parcel is worth $100 million of taxable value. So, which is quite impressive. But it's really not a fair way of looking at it because it's an 8,000 acre parcel with a 180,000 square foot house. Does anybody in our community have a 179,000 square foot house? No. So this is the only thing like it. It's the biggest gas tank. So rather than total value, let's do value per acre, the map change. So we're not going to stop there. Let's see it in 3D. So this is the value per acre productivity of our entire county. You can see downtown shooting off the map. Additionally, you can see Black Mountain to the east. That's a little village of about 12,000 people. That's our little sister. It's about 10 miles away. And you can see its little main street popping up as well, like a little foothill. That space between Black Mountain and Asheville is an area called Swannanoa. And those folks there think that they're paying a lot of taxes but that's all relative. They don't know our taxes and what we pay. So when you show them this model, we can see what's being produced in our county and who's carrying the freight in the county's taxes, and that would be the city of Asheville. So this is a way of geospatially analyzing things. It's all spatial analysis. This is a joke. I know this only works for people over the age of 35, but I still like to use it. It's spatial. So for you all, the first thing that we had to do is analyze your taxes and how your taxes work. Every state has a different tax system. And to show you how simple ours is one of the simplest ones we've ever seen. It's called a straight line system. You have a market value. Everybody gets the same taxable value deduction, and that's set by our state, commercial and residential, to get a taxable value. And then you multiply your tax rate, then you get your tax bill. That's it. For y'all, you have a little bit more exemptions than we do. So you have exemptions that people can file for that are set up by your state policy to get your taxable value. And then you get your local tax rate put on top of that. But your tax rate is, in the case of Manchester, we saw that it's your needed budget subtracting the non-property tax revenue divided by the city's assessed value overall. So that's a little bit more complicated, but not the most complicated that we've seen. So if you're to take Dover, for example, Dover's paying about 2% of taxes on, let's say, a $600,000 property of commercial or residential. It's going to be the same tax bill at about $14,000. When you look at the county, however, of Stratford County, it's a 0.1%. So it's a whole lot less taxes that go to the county. And when you get to the southern states, you see that flip. We pay more taxes to our county than our cities. And that's just the way that our tax systems are set up. So with your state, these are your parcels across the entire state. The White Mountain parcels were coming in with value, but once you start applying the valuations, you see that it's actually exempted. This is the value per acre, and you can see that the heat down on the south side of the state, down in Nashua and in Manchester. There are some missing parcels. It looks like somebody blasted your state with a shotgun. That's actually not so bad. We've seen worse. Over in Maine, they're missing a lot more, but those areas are generally so rural. There's not a lot of parcels. It's not like they're not paying taxes. They're all paying taxes. It's just that your state hasn't mapped them into the geospatial data yet that we can visualize it. So there is some missing data, but it's not that bad. So here's your state. This is how you model across the state, and our project was to focus on these 15 communities and look at them as a sample. So think of these as y'all are cousins in this state, and you have shared relationships, and you're all in different places in time. Some are older, some are bigger, some are smaller, some are newer, some are more rural. So statewide, you're looking at about 20% non-taxable, and you can see there's a big concentration of that up in the mountains. And here's going into the different sample sets. And there's videos for each of these peer groups. There's the upper valley folks, the central corridor, the seacoast, southern tier, and tonight we're working on the southwest region. And here are all the communities within all of those areas. If you want to go back and look at those videos, we have those for you. Now for you all, we'll start with Keene. This is your total value map, or your miles per tank, if you will. And you can see that the West Street Shopping Center is pretty hot. It's coming in as red. When you go from total value to value per acre, it drops down to a yellow, and here it is in 3D. And you can see how flat it is compared to other stuff. So this is your productivity. So think of just laying a blanket across this model. Where it pops up, that's where you're getting your most potent punch of taxes. Here's your Cheshire County with Keene and Jaffrey and Granite Lake, and you can see the villages popping up. And generally, this is the productivity of your county. Your county is a shareholder of the entire state. It's about 8% of the state's footprint. It's producing about 5% of the state's value, which is less than a 1-to-1 ratio of value. Your city of Keene inside the county of Cheshire is about 5% of the footprint, is producing about 27% of the county's property taxes, which is a 1-to-6 ratio of productivity. That's pretty strong as a producer to your county. Now inside the city, your downtown inside Keene is about 0.3% of footprint. It's about 5% of the property value. That's impressive. That's a 1 to 20 ratio of productivity. So imagine having, I don't know, let's say 100 people in a shoe store, and one person's responsible for 20 times the amount of shoe sales versus everybody else. That's showing you the potency of your downtown. That's really strong. A good downtown is somewhere down around 1 to 6. So you're about 3 times over that. Let's not forget that your downtown's a piece of the county, and it doesn't even show up as a footprint, and it's producing about 1.4% of the value. That's a 1 to 115 times productivity. So what you see here, what's good for downtown is great for the city, but it's unbelievable for the county. Now again, your counties don't have nearly the budget that most counties have, but understand there's the potency that returns back to your community with that value investment. These are your downtowns are your golden geese, if you will. Countywide, you're looking at about 10% non-taxable, and you can see the clusters in Pisgah State Park. When you get into the city, you're about 16% non-taxable. That's about average in the sample. And so zooming into the city now, the land type, so the ingredients or the crops inside Keene, here's your single family average. We just grabbed one house, but that house is hitting the average median, which is about 400,000 an acre, which is 4 times the average of the whole city. So on the lower right of the slide, you see the average of the whole city. Here's your multifamily, which is many times more than single family. What is that? About 5 times, 6 times the overall city, or the single family. Here's your commercial. Now you see it dip down to about 900,000, so under $1 million. And that's because it's just huge fields of parking and really cheap buildings. So that's what we get with commercial in the burbs. When you get in your downtown, you start to see the potency at about 8 million for that 3-story building. And here's a 5-story building pulling 14 million of value per acre. That's highly, highly productive. This is the same information just put on a map. So you can see, rather than the 3D model with the graphic, you can see it more in place or in situ on the map of where things are. Excuse me. Looking at it from the side, like a mountain profile, here's the tide mark for the city average. Here's single family, and here's commercial. Here's where multifamily comes in, and you can see the huge jump up that you get with multifamily. And then here's the mixed use, and here's the peak of your mountain at about 14 million, which is very, very impressive. So you can see the shape of your city. Now, obviously, there's some rules here, or lessons here that you can learn from this. Filling in the gaps in the mountain area, or building more of the foothills, builds more wealth in your community, so you can support more of the green stuff. This isn't to say don't do green stuff or the single family. It's just be aware of the cost and consequences of that land use type. So that's the reason why we do this model, to know how to harvest more wealth in your community to pay for things. A park doesn't pay for itself, so you've got to pay. You need to get that money somewhere. On to Peterborough. Here's your city or town. The River Mead is coming in super hot. Is one of the most potent when you look at total value. When you go to value per acre, you see the model shift, and you can see Peterborough's Main Street popping up in the model. It's a much smaller community. You all know that, but a really concentrated, potent little downtown in Peterborough. Peterborough is part of the Hillsborough County, and you've got these 2 bigger brothers up the street there in Nashua and Manchester. It is interesting to look at Nashua and Manchester because you can really see the power of downtown Manchester popping up, and Nashua is like kind of flat as a pancake down there, but we'll come back to that. So focusing on Hillsborough County, much more potent part of the state at about 10%, because it has 2 of the largest cities in its portfolio, producing about 25% of the value. So that's a 1 to 2.5 value of productivity for the state, which is good. When you look at Peterborough inside Hillsborough County, it's about 5% of the land area, only 2% of the value. It's not as potent. Well, it's also due to the fact that you have these two large cities putting down the lion's share of revenue for the county. It is what it is, if you will. Now, just looking inside Peterborough and looking at Main Street in downtown Peterborough, it's about 1/10% of the city. It's producing about 3% of the value. That's a stunning 1/32 value production from downtown to the city, which is very, very productive. Now, when you go to the county, again, it's not as impressive as what you've seen in Keene, but it's still not so bad at 1/14, even though and even with Manchester and Keene just up the road there. Inside Hillsborough County, this is all the taxable, non-taxable. There's a missing parcel in that gray area. About 20% non-taxable in Hillsborough County. When you get into Peterborough, you're looking at about 13% non-taxable in the community. And for the land types, here's average single family is about 170,000, a lot less value than over in Keene. Not a lot, but some. The average value is lower at 38,000. When you get into multifamily, again, you see that bump. It essentially doubles in value to multifamily. Not as big of a jump as in what you saw in Keene, but a jump. When you get into the commercial, you're at about the same at about 900,000. Mixed use, you're getting at 4.6 million per acre. And then this one's the peak at 12 million an acre. And it's because it's a dense multi-story building, so it's going to be very, very valuable in its punch economically to the community. And here are those parcels on a map if you're going to look for them. So from the title mark standpoint, here's the average of the city at, what's that, like 40,000 an acre. Here's average for single family, then multifamily is just a bit above that. And you get into commercial, it's not bad. Mixed use is where it starts to accelerate, and then your peak at 12 million. So to compare you against, and again, we'll have all of these are fun to study as just a printout or a PDF where you can really study them, as well as this next series, which is where we compare things. And this is a lot of information to take in. And I'll go a little slower with these, but basically these are all of the cities in the sample set lined up against each other is in a series of data points. So this is the population side, and you can see Peterborough at the smallest, and Keene is in the middle of the pack at 23,000 between Portsmouth and Hudson. When you get into total acres, you can see Peterborough's in the middle of the pack. It's a much larger area, and Keene is actually bigger than Keene by 3,000 acres of land. Now, if we have acres in population, we could figure out density. Peterborough is the least dense in the sample set. Keene's between Pelham and Rochester at about 1.3 people per acre. The density of what was interesting here is Portsmouth. Check out Portsmouth versus Nashua. Who would have thought that Portsmouth is less dense than Nashua? Nashua is incredibly dense. It's not thick or tall, so it's density that comes from basically suburban sprawl. People tend to think of suburbia as being low density, but it's really not. Once it starts to get built up, it becomes highly dense, and it has all the inefficiencies of a inefficient transportation system. So it's something to be mindful of with Nashua. But here y'all are in the sample set. Taxable, non-taxable, this is how you stack up against each other in volume. But let's look at it. This is probably the more fair way of looking at it, which is how much of your community is non-taxable. And Berlin is by far the outlier in this model. The average across the sample is about 19% non-taxable. So both of your communities are above average in taxable property. There's no magic here, no perfect number. It's just being mindful of this. You can't have a 100% taxable city. You're not going to have parks or schools or city buildings, but you want to keep that in check. But also that stuff provides value and quality of life for your community. So you can look at Exeter as an example. Actually has a lot of non-taxable. To remove the state parks from Berlin, they become just like every other community. So it's just, you know, they don't manage that state park. So it's really, they're really about average. Now from a value standpoint, Peterborough actually starts to pop up above Berlin and Claremont in total value. And Keene is right in the middle of the pack with Rochester at about let's call it 2.5 billion. And Peterborough is about, let's call it 900 million of value. Your average value per acre across a sample set, Peterborough is about 39,000 per acre, averaged across the whole town. And Keene's coming in about 100,000, a little bit more than Hanover, and less than Pelham on average value per acre. Sampling the cities, the best way to do the peer groups was based on population. So we'll go through some of these sample sets, and I can show you against peer groups that are about the same population. Obviously, you're not in the Nashua, Manchester group. That's a much larger place. But there are some lessons we can learn from them. The average value per acre across the sample sets, here's where you are compared to, let's say, Portsmouth, is incredibly potent. Interestingly, Rochester has the same density as Keene, and they're a lot less, about $20,000 less per acre than Keene. Here's the smaller group sets of, so these are all basically about the same population. So there's something to learn from Hanover. Is it because of their location? Is it because of, is there something they're doing with their density that's driving up their value? Is it the price of a house in the marketplace? But Peterborough is doing all right compared to Claremont. So, and obviously Berlin is so far up into the state. It is a much different economic system up there, and also the constraints of distance from larger cities. Downtown ratio, however, look at Berlin at the far right, but Peterborough's just right behind it at 32. That's that 1:32 ratio of their downtown to the whole town, which is actually more potent than Keene's downtown to the city of Keene. So just, you know, again, these are just more data points to look at. And I know this is a lot of information to go through. I'm trying to go as slow as possible, but this is still a lot of it. I know it's a lot of information to take. So Peterborough on a people per acre and Keene on a people per acre, just to stack you against your value per acre for Peterborough and Keene, you're about the same spot in both charts. But again, you can study this at length later on, maybe with a good warm cup of coffee. So back to that chart, I showed you how things stack up as they go on. We went ahead and did that for the New Hampshire sample set. And here's how you stack up, and you see the similar trend. Actually, you can see the potency in multifamily in your sample set above single family. And this isn't to say everybody needs to move into an apartment. It's just to understand the potency that you get for that in your community is actually a really good return. And everybody needs a place to live, so that's going to provide that value. But you really see is what happens on your main street and the potency that y'all get. And you have a lot to be thankful for in all of your communities in New Hampshire that many cities would kill to have some of your architecture. So just, you know, celebrate that, do more of it, and work with it. So back to the clusters. Here's just looking at Peterborough and Keene side by side, so that you can see them from a population standpoint. A tremendously big, a much larger difference in population here. But you can also see the shapes of your cities and your downtowns popping up as spikes. Your average value, Keene is much more potent on an average value standpoint. You can pretty much see that in the model. But the downtown ratio, again, Peterborough, you have something to work with here. Filling in that main street, growing it up a little bit. You've got some gaps in your model that you can thicken in that can produce wealth, and you're getting a return on that. And you can see that in the peak, that Peterborough, you're pretty close to Keene's peak. And again, Keene, you can see in your model how to thicken in your downtown as well. Looking at the, Keene falls into the, we created a sort of academic cluster. You have an academic asset in your community, the way that Exeter does and Hanover does, even though they're different kinds of academic environments with different potencies. These are some sample sets you can look at, and you can see you're kind of within the realm of closeness in a population standpoint. You can see that Exeter actually has a lot more non-taxable than the other two. So even with that burden of non-taxable, they're achieving a higher average value in potency. So with less land, they're actually getting more revenue out of it, which could afford more parks and more open space to do that. And then also, Keene's not so shabby with, you're actually peaking out higher than Exeter, but less so than Hanover. But Hanover has Dartmouth within it that brings that value as well. But this is good. These are all three of these are good. To show you an example of what's not so good, we can look at Hudson, Pelham, and Laconia, and you can see how flat those models are and how relatively low their peaks are, less than 10 million an acre. So this Peterborough beats Laconia in its greatest peak of value per acre. So back to the Peterborough example with the small town clusters with the downtown focus. You can see the populations are all relatively the same size. Peterborough is doing very well with its peak compared to Claremont and Berlin. You're basically hitting the level of Lebanon, which is twice the population of Peterborough. But Lebanon's pulling a thicker, heavier, more valuable average value, and some of that is a spillover effect from Hanover. But you see with Berlin, is a high downtown to city relationship, but Peterborough, that you do have that, you're coming in behind that at 32-1. And finally, just looking at the big communities, I mentioned this earlier. You can see that Nashua is actually somewhere between Concord and Manchester in population, a really potent average value, but a very low peak value. So even though they're able to achieve a high tide of an average value per acre, they didn't capitalize on building a mountain in the downtown. And you can really see that in spades in Concord with the 45, let's call it 46 million an acre of peak value in the top of their mountain relative to their base value or their average value. And of course, Manchester is a big city. It's going to have a tall mountain. So lessons, there's lots of lessons in all of this. The historic value, the value that you get. You have old buildings, and this is one of my favorite examples used is Charleston, South Carolina. There's a lot of old buildings down here. It's like the Boston of the South. And when I was presenting there, I said, look, you can't claim the ocean value. We're going to go ahead and wipe that out. This is what humans made. So that's the man-made world. And you can see the peninsula of Old Town Charleston right there. And Charleston's old. It's like Boston. It predates the Declaration of Independence. So we grabbed all the buildings that predate our birth date. So we know when our country was created. Here's a building that's built in 1686. It's the Red Dot Liquor Store. It's the oldest liquor store in the country. That's a revolutionary getting his drink on right there. Very potent building at $13 million of value per acre for a building that's 14 feet by 20 feet. Highly productive. Here are all those old buildings that predate our country on the map. Here they are in plan. So there's 21 acres that were built before 1776. This is what they paid in county taxes. They paid city taxes and downtown taxes on top of that. This is just what the county got, right, as a base level in 1 year out of those buildings. Now we can go out into the county, we grab the Walmart. The Walmart's the same acreage. This is what it paid the same year. So that Walmart's not going to be here 20 years from now. That Walmart is paying on a fast depreciating cycle, while those other buildings that predate our country have been paying this high level for over 240 years. So I want you to think about this, is that how is our tax system set up, and what is the value that gets created when these buildings are producing 13 times the potency and they've been doing it for 200 years? So when we see the quote market happen, the market is actually following these perverse incentives. So if you tax me less for building cheap buildings that are a throwaway, that become a problem in the landfill, I'll do that. So understand that the system is playing a different game than what we think we're playing. But the lesson is in our heritage and what you see in your community. And Hanover learned this. You can see that these are in Peterborough, you as well. These buildings that are really productive are actually learning and mimicking older buildings. So the Hanover building and the Peterborough building, those are new, and they're highly productive because of the density and the lessons that we've learned from history that our great grandparents gave us. So these are the values of urban design, and there's some other things to be mindful of. And when you look at the numbers, so when we were doing the Manchester project, one of the things that people told us is that there was a parking problem downtown. So we mapped it. Where's the parking? That's all the red stuff. There's a lot of parking in downtown Manchester. Now it may not be convenient, like right at the front door of the restaurant that you want to go into, but it's kind of funny how we've conditioned ourselves to just complain about stuff like this. So we just said, look, here's the deal. Going from the lofts by the river, 5-minute walk into the city, you can see all of the parking that's within that 5-minute walk circle. Now those white arrows are pointing to all of the opportunities for parking structures that you can get into if you wanted to. So it's not like there's a deficit of parking, there's just a deficit of walking. And there's a financial ramification to this. So this is the city area and is a big beige square. That's the total area of Manchester. Then we shoved all the buildings into side by side, all the parking side by side in the roads. Just let that image wash over you for a second. They have almost as much land dedicated to parking as they've got buildings. The buildings is where you're getting all your taxes. Now that gray stuff, you've got to pay for it. Those roads are expensive. So to give you an idea, here's their actual numbers in Manchester. The average Manchester resident has about 1,000 square feet of building dedicated to her and about 600 square feet of parking. When that gets built, the assessor goes out and puts a price tag on stuff. So the average building value is about $90. And this is the best parking lot in downtown. It's at Pearl Street. That's pulling about $1.20 per square foot in value. So that road, however, that goes by the building and by the parking is going to cost you about $20 a square foot. So it's costing you $20 a square foot in front of the parking, $20 a square foot in front of that building. But if you notice, $1.20 is 75 times less taxes than 90, right? It's just, if you're taxing 2% on $1.20 or 2% on 90, you're getting more money out of that 90. So that's the subsidy. When you say parking subsidized, that's where that transfer happens, is you just pay less taxes for it. So do the math on that, and just I'm not saying don't have parking, just be aware that when you let somebody waste a tremendous amount of real estate with parking, they're essentially getting a tax break for it because that road costs money. So be mindful of it. It's going to cost you the same to plow in front of that parking lot as it's going to cost you to plow in front of the building. So understand the revenues, also understanding what you're carrying. The cost of that road is a carrying cost. That's a liability. So think of your city a different way. Let's go back to real estate development. If I had an asset, that mall is my asset. I own the mall. I know that when I own the mall, I've got to fix the air conditioners. I've got to replace them actually. And they're really expensive. They're about $85,000 a pop to stick those on top of the mall. Now, when I do that, I also have to hire a crew at $35,000 for the crew in the sky crane to drop that stuff up there. So every 15 to 20 years, I've got a plan for spending about $205,000. That's the reality of owning a liability, that you have to fix it. I don't have a printing press in my basement that prints money. I've got to make that money somehow. The same is true of cities. You make it in taxes. So you make here's your liability, that road. You've got 2 lanes of road. Yet if you look at the street section, you've got 6 levels of revenue spilling money in to pay for that 2 lanes. This is a much more financially tenable situation than this, where you have all of this expense and very little revenue. So that's fine, you can build a road like that, but can you afford to keep it forever? And the answer is no. So understand that there's a liability cost with this stuff. And if you do it, just if you can afford it, great. But if you can't afford it, you shouldn't be doing more of it. And I'll give you maybe a worst case scenario, or a bad case scenario is Lancaster, California, which is up and over the mountain from Los Angeles. They're about 160,000 people. They're at the edge of the Mojave Desert. that tall purple spike in their model is their tallest building downtown, which is 3 stories. So Peterborough actually has a bigger building than them. That's not a good sign. So they have all this horizontal infrastructure and no value coming out of their model. But the scary thing is they have 953 miles of roads, which is a lot of roads. I don't know what that looks like, so we put it on a map to show them. So let's think of it another way. That they essentially, that road, once it gets built, has to be rebuilt every 50 years. So every 50 years, they have to build a road from Los Angeles to Portland. Could you imagine being a mayor and making a campaign that we're going to build a road all the way to Portland? Of course not. So what it does is it's this death by 1,000 cuts. It happens over time. All these little moves. So we put their roads on a timeline to show them when they were all built. And you could see that their great grandparents in the early 1900s built some roads, and then everybody went to sleep until World War II, and then they got a little crazy. And particularly in 1953 when they built all of these lane miles. Well, guess what? When your grandparents built all of that, that comes back to haunt your parents' generation with the first rebuild. And when your community was hit with that huge capital expense of fixing all of that stuff, they went scrambling for money. They tried to get money from the state. They tried to get some bonds. They try to find money because they have to fix that road. Sadly, in many cases, which is common, they let out more development. More development means more taxes. Great, yay. Well, it also means more roads. So it comes back with the second rebuild, and it brings along with it the new stuff that they build. This is the reality of every American city. This is what we've done to ourselves over the last 50 years. This is not a surprise. So we stopped them in 2016 and said, you're not building another road from here to infinity. Let's see how this pencils out. So this is the build rebuild cycle of all the stuff that they're carrying, all of the replacement of all of their infrastructure. And we could look back in time and say, well, you know, that first wave just looks kind of stupid. Now, when we look at it in hindsight, where did that come from? And then we went ahead and doubled down on that and said, Joe, we don't ride horses anymore. We're all car people. It's like, all right, well, you just built more infrastructure. And now you're doubling down on it, and it's getting bigger and bigger. So that carrying cost of stuff you already own, notice how it starts to capitalize on itself. It's getting more expensive, and I'm not adding any more to the system. You could just look at this statically and say, okay, that's crazy. Now let's take a next step further. Do you think it's going to get cheaper to buy asphalt in the future? Of course not. We just did a study in Florida. The rates of asphalt growth are growing at between 7 and 11% growth in cost of asphalt on a year-to-year basis. And most city growth is way below that. You know, just look at your own salaries. Are they growing at 11% per year? So the cost of consuming all of this stuff are going to get worse and worse over time. So in this community, if we flushed all of their money into this system and said, here's the money that you have that you can afford to pay for roads, you can only afford half your road system that you currently own. So our recommendation to them was to, you know, unplug some roads, just let them go back to dirt or something, but you can't maintain them in order to add more of that red stuff into what you can afford. You got to unplug some of the green stuff. And if you think this is funny and it's just like, oh, that's just South California, well, let's look at Manchester. 1925, this is the amount of people they had, about 77,000 people. It's a lot of people. They were big back then. This is the amount of miles of roads they had. And so basically they could live with those people on about 10 feet of road per person. They grew their city to 111,000. They grew a lot more roads. They have about 500 miles of roads now, which is about 25 feet of road per person. So they've effectively doubled the road cost per person. So that means you better double the revenue that goes to the community as well, because you've just doubled the cost. Or look at it this way: they've grown their population by 44%. They've grown their cost by 163%. This is not a tenable situation. The patterns of how this happens are really important as well. But let that wash over you for a second. They, you know, were their grandparents in the 1920s? Were they not able to get around town? And they even had cars back then. So this is how we've built this system without thinking through the long-term effects of it. Now I'll show you an example. This is South Bend, Indiana, where we took 88 houses that are in a grid pattern and 88 houses that are in some sort of super cul-de-sac. It's a cul-de-sac of cul-de-sacs. But basically, these are both 88 houses, and let's measure them. So here are their 88 houses. Here's their roads. They have about, if you look at what they should be setting aside for the maintenance and reserve replacement for the roads, it's about $75,000 for this neighborhood. Water pipes at about 12,000, storm sewer and sewer pipes at about 35,000 for those infrastructures. So that's the annual payment they should be paying for this neighborhood. Now, we don't charge single family housing the actual cost. We're basically taking that from commercial properties, multifamily properties near downtown. And that's the way the system works. This isn't to shame people in single family housing. It's just that that's the reality of how we set up that system. We subsidize single family housing in our country. So the revenues that they're paying are about 10% of their taxes, which amounts to about 21,000. So the subsidy for this neighborhood is about $100,000 a year in payments that they're not making. So that's the subsidy. When you go back to this neighborhood, here's their 88 houses, and let's just kind of blow through their infrastructure. So they're at about 79,000, and they're producing about the same money. So we can put them side by side and see this. So look at the total annual cost bolded in black. That the neighborhood on the right is, what is that, 40 times, 40,000 more deficit in cost than the neighborhood on the left. If you look at the line beneath that, they're both paying about the same in property taxes. So the deficit on the right is about 2 times the deficit of the neighborhood on the left. Same number of units, same taxable revenues, basically. So they're paying the same, their costs are different. And you may say, Joe, I want to live on a cul-de-sac. It's like, great, can you afford it? Is that the best thing for your community? Are we going to sacrifice a park or a greenway or a daycare program so that 88 people could live on cul-de-sacs? If that's what you want, great, go for it, if you can afford it. So, okay, so now what? One is Domore Analytics. This is a map that we typically do. We didn't do this for this project, but this is for Cheyenne, Wyoming. We just turn off all the buildings and look at the dirt value per acre to see what's going on in the assessment system. In the upper left, you see this neighborhood that's all light blue. That's how you'd expect the dirt to look in a neighborhood. Everybody's got the same dirt value per square foot, per acre, per whatever, right? It's fair. When you look at the commercial strip with all the big parcels on it, you can see that blue parcel with the 2 yellow dots in it. That's the mall. So I was presenting this in Cheyenne and I said, hey, why is that property blue? And when you cross the street in the same zoning category, it turns orange. How does property in blue is 15,000 an acre, orange is 40,000 an acre. So land more than doubles in value when you cross the street. And the tax assessor raised her hand and she goes, no, you don't understand. I said, what am I missing? She goes, well, the parcel, the mall is a bigger parcel, and the bigger the parcel, the lower the value. As soon as she said that, the mayor started laughing so hard he almost spat coffee out of his nose. He's like, and I'm like, really? I get more land, you give me a discount. She goes, yeah, that's our standard. And I said, okay, the mall's got 3 miles of infrastructure that go around the property, and the property across the street only has 200 feet. So I get more infrastructure. She goes, yeah, but we don't charge you for your infrastructure. We charge you for your valuation. I'm like, so you don't care about infrastructure? She goes, no. Like, you don't care about what you put into the ground, you don't ever want it back. She goes, no, that's not our standard. So the reason why I was at that assessors conference was to ask them. I said, this is their magazine. I said, how is this fair and how is this equitable? Now, to their credit, they're like, it's not. I'm like, where did this standard come from? Did Moses deliver this to you? They're like, we don't know where it came from. And I'm like, so how would it affect the market? If you give me a discount for larger parcels, if you give me more infrastructure and I pay you less taxes, isn't that going to affect the market forces? And they're like, yeah, we probably need to change that. You need to talk to Larry. So I tracked this guy, Larry Clark, down, who's the head of tax valuation at the assessors organization. He thought this whole thing was funny. He's like, this is great. And I said, where did this come from? He's like, I don't know. We probably need to change it. So he's going to change it. But when you look at your models, you can see this. Just look to the west of 293 in the lower part of this model. You can see this residential neighborhood where one little cluster of about 20 properties are shooting up in hot red compared to all the pink stuff all around it. These are all residential neighborhoods. Why is that one neighborhood's dirt so much more valuable than everybody else? Just look at this model and kind of it'll show you what's going on from a policy perspective. And just, if it's fair for you, great. If it's not fair with you, change it, change the policy. You need to be able to afford your communities. Also, lesson number 2, learn from your neighbors. You've got all of this incredible data set now. So study the different peers, your different cousins, figure out what's going on. Now you have this information, keep it going. This is awesome. This one, maintain and recreate your historic value. The Portsmouth example is a really good one to look at. That's a postcard from 1905. on the upper left, these are all the same buildings just sitting here. $40 million of value per acre for that Pierce block. It's just a 4-story building there. So this is stuff that, these people had horse technology when they built this stuff. It's not like they had I don't even think they had steam engines back then. It's like they're building this stuff and it produces value. And Portsmouth has learned this. The building on the right is an old building. The building on the left is replicating the architecture, quality, and density of the building on the right. The building on the left is $70 million of value per acre. That's really impressive. Adapt your buildings. This is, again, a lesson that you all know. This is no surprise. All these buildings aren't their original uses, but the architecture allows them to just iterate and change over time. That allows those businesses that fail or people retire or people move, those new businesses can create new lifeblood. The building on the far left is an old factory that's now multifamily, producing about $2 million of value per acre. That's really good. Realize that parking is subsidized. I know I hammered this point home earlier. I'm going to hammer it again. You need to know this. Now, again, this isn't to say don't do parking. It's just be mindful of the consequences and make sure that you can afford it. Build for productivity. This isn't to say that commercial stuff is bad. It's just less valuable. And if you can afford it, if you need it, go for it. Or if it's something that you want to have for cheaper goods and services, great, but just be mindful of that loss of value. Be mindful of that exchange that you're doing indirectly, but also be mindful of the value that you get out of this. And again, earlier I mentioned this, Peterborough and Hanover have both learned from actually Keene, you did as well with the buildings in your downtown. Your patterns have costs. You can go ahead and use this from South Bend, but this is true of the little lollipops that are innocently built out into the hills and hollers in your community. That it may be 2 to 5 houses out there, but that stuff adds up over time. There's costs to that, and if you can afford it, great. Measure what you own, measure your streets, do this in your communities, and just be agnostic about it, and don't see it as a bad thing. At least be tracking it, understand what's going on and how much you're carrying. And I would say, because this is a tax system study for your entire state, I would proffer that y'all should have a big statewide conversation about your tax system and what's an appropriate tax. And one of the lessons that I want to put out there is maybe to consider at least getting enabling legislation for land value taxation. Land value taxation was heavily promoted in the late 1800s by Henry George. So I don't know if you all have ever heard of it, but it's just something that, take a look at it and at least get the enabling legislation. I'm not saying you have to do it, but at least let your state and allow the towns and cities to choose it if they so wanted. Pennsylvania has the enabling legislation. Vermont just changed theirs to allow it. I don't know if anybody in Vermont's done it yet. I know that people in Pennsylvania have. But put it this way, what Henry George thought was patently unfair, that if you just happen to hold land and sit on land, you're paying tax on how you use it. So if you're land speculating, you have no buildings on it, you're paying the lowest taxes possible. Meanwhile, the community is paying for all the expenses of infrastructure, for sending a snowplow in front of the property, all that stuff, and you're paying taxes that aren't commensurate with your costs, the cost of the street or whatever. And he's like, look, why should you tax that way? Additionally, if I have a granite building and I'm right side by side with a wooden building, I'm on the same street, why am I paying more just because I have a granite building? That building is going to last forever versus the wood building. Shouldn't you be giving me a benefit because I'm passing on that value to great grandkids in the community? So he's like, why don't you just tax everybody at the same level, and you're taxed based on your potency. So that will stop land speculation, or at least if you're going to speculate, you're at least paying your fair share into the system. Now everybody's like, you're crazy, we can't change the tax system, this is too hard. And it even though there was like this national movement to do this, people just became complacent. Elizabeth Maggie Phillips is a different kind of person. She was a Georgist. She followed him around and she thought this was great, so she promoted it as well, but she took a different tack. I love her eyebrows, by the way. But she's like, I can't work with adults. Adults are too set in their ways. I'm going to work with kids. So she invented a board game to teach us all land value taxation. Does this look familiar to you all? That's Monopoly. Now she called it the landlord's game. But how do you win this game? Location, land assembly, and you put buildings on it. If you can do that, you win the game. She taught us the efficiency of cities and towns and villages, and somehow as adults we think it's too complicated. So I would just say, maybe as part of this, I would recommend that you all get together and just ask your state legislature to just give you the enabling legislation at the local level, so that if you choose to do a different form of finance, go for it. But you need to have that ability. So just to close, we just see this as a form of, we call it geo accounting. We're putting your accounting on a map so you can see it, and we behave like your accountant. Your accountant doesn't care if you buy a boat, right? Your accountant cares if you can afford a boat. These are going to be all choices that you make in your community. Make sure that you can afford them. They're your choices. If you can afford a boat, go for it. So our job was to just paint these numbers on a map so that you can see them. Use these graphics to communicate with your friends at your Rotary Club, whatever you want. We deliberately make these graphic images so you can see what's actually happening. And just to put a small plug in before we close, I would highly recommend reading Chuck Marone's book, Strong Towns, and following Strong Towns online. It's a national nonprofit, or international now. And a lot of what Chuck talks about, we visualized in this presentation. And it's just really important stuff to know. So thank you for letting us do your math. And I guess we'll open it to questions. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. That was a really informative presentation. A lot of great information. I have to say though, my cat stood up and left the room after the cat joke. So,
Sorry.
But
people are obnoxious.
Just to remind folks to use that chat feature, and we'll be monitoring that and feeding those questions to Joe. And I see one just coming into the chat right now, and it's from Karen. Are there good examples of ways towns can or have incentivized redevelopment of existing buildings in the downtown?
Yeah, there's a number of ways. One is, I've seen tax increment districts where they've arrested the tax rate in the downtown, and any improvement that happens gets folded back into infrastructure investment. Downtown Fort Collins, Colorado took it to the next level, where they used the TIF district, the tax increment district, as a bond financing device, where they basically ran the numbers on what their town would be worth if they fulfilled their downtown plan. So they went out and took down a bond that they paid back with new tax growth, and they used that bond to catalyze investment. That's at the public sector side. You can do things at a private sector side you can do a synthetic tax increment, where you basically just give an abatement on a property and just say, we're gonna see the long-term value in your investment in your building, so we're gonna forego taxes on this property for 5 years, give you a holiday, so long as you do X, Y, and Z on the building to increase its value. The other thing is, we've seen straight up grants for facade improvements. Sometimes it's having a conversation with the property owner and realizing that maybe they're not that savvy about doing rehab, and they don't have any carrying cost because that building has been in the family forever. So how do you partner them with somebody that's got some energy that they want to put into the building? And that's going to come down to a political relationship or conversation about working out a deal with them, where you may find a 20-year-old that wants to move back to town, and somebody's grandma has a property, and the 20-year-old has all the energy and time to put into a rehab project, where somebody that's older doesn't. And they don't have, they maybe have the wisdom that they know how difficult it's going to be, but when you're in your 20s, you could do anything. You can stay up all night and work on a house, So there is, it's going to be different in each town. And I'm sure George is online, and if there's other state mechanisms that could come through the housing finance, and if there's tools there, if you create housing in your downtown, is there a partnership you could do with the state, with the state with their housing program?
Great. Thanks. Just to tack onto that, and broadening that question a bit, um, I'm wondering if there, and you touched on a few in your presentation, but maybe just to recap and explore this a bit further, what are some of the policy levers that local communities can use to encourage increased potency in their downtown and to grow that those financial skyscrapers, so to speak, in their town center? I wonder if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, there's let me show you something here. Let's see if I've got it up. I did a presentation in Berlin. Yeah, here we go. I'm going to share my screen again, sorry. Is it sharing right now?
Yeah, we can see it.
You can see Gwinnett County?
Yep.
Okay. So in Gwinnett County, which is home of Lawrenceville, this is one of the buildings that we found. We call these buildings little Lebowskis, which is a kind of a play on the Big Lebowski movie, but these little buildings that nobody notices. So this is Doug's Boots. Doug's Boots is 10 feet wide. That it was built in an alley. I guess Doug probably knew somebody and just took over an alley and dropped a building in it. But it's pulling $400,000 of taxable value per acre. If you just looked at the tax rolls, you wouldn't even notice it. It's $24,000 of taxable value, but it's on 0.06 acres. This is a tiny, tiny property. Inside Lawrenceville, apparently this was a thing because just around the corner you find these two, the Bench Jewelers, which is a whopping 8 feet wide, and then Bath Body Bar over there that's, a just enormous 7-foot wide building right there. I mean, the green awning is pretty much the width of the store. But look at the tax values, 12,000, 17,000, but per acre, Bath Body Bar is crushing it at 1.7 million per acre for that little thing. And, putting aside the Bench Jeweler and Bath Body Bar, going back to Doug's, if you had 80 acres of Doug's Boots, it would equal the 113-acre Sugarloaf Mall. This is a pattern of increment that we built in cities that was kind of commonplace. And if you go to old cities, you can find them, like Boston. This building here, this is called the Skinny House. Those pictures from the inside are actually from Zillow. Some architect just bought the building, and someone likes a small building in Boston. Great, who would have thought? The building's 10 feet wide, built in 1874. If you look at the building that's on the right of it there, that was the owner's brother. So this family owned this parcel of land. The guy in the wooden house went off to fight in the Civil War. When he came back, his brother had built that brick building on half his father's parcel and left him that little spit right there. So he got so mad that he just built a building on it anyway and covered up his brother's windows in spite of his brother. If you Google spite houses, you can find a bunch of these, particularly in New England. Spite must be a thing. But that's $62 million of value per acre. This is another one in Alexandria, Virginia. This little guy here was a dollhouse built by the adjoining property for this guy's daughters. And his daughters played in it until they got old, and one of them left the house, the other moved into the dollhouse, and she lived in it until she died. But somebody else now lives in it. The whole parcel of land is 356 square feet. It's pulling $64 million of value per acre. The building is skinnier than a smart car. Now, in most cities, this is illegal. In most cities, there's an ordinance where you have to have like a 50-foot wide parcel or something like that. Like, why? Why would you have that? So I presented that in Berlin because I was talking with the planner and she was talking about her minimum lot size. And I'm like, why would you have that? And I showed her those buildings. She's like, yeah, I don't know why I have that. It's like sometimes we have rules. Sometimes the rules are necessary. Lots of times they're not. Robert Frost has a great quote, which is, you don't take down a fence until you know why it was put up. And I find that there's some validity to that when you look at your zoning code. Is look at your zoning code, ask why that rule's there. Why do you have 2 parking spaces per residential unit? Is it necessary? You know, do you have that many cars in your community? We did an analysis of Indianapolis, Indiana, and countywide in Indianapolis, Indiana, home to the Indianapolis 500, 50% of the households have 1 car or less. Half the community. When you get into this, there's an area where they're doing the bus rapid transit corridor. 60% of the people inside that bus rapid transit corridor have 1 car or less. So why do you have 2 cars per residential unit as a mandate inside that area? So at least inside the bus rapid transit corridor, when the majority of people have 1 car or less, don't build so much parking. Because if you make me as a developer build that parking, I'm going to put that cost on the cost of the unit, right? So why would you make me do that? You're just making housing more expensive. I got to make that money somehow, right? So I would just, interrogate your zoning code, interrogate your processes, interrogate why you ask the questions you do, and also challenge your community. If somebody's going to show up at a community process for design review and they just think that it's, in bad taste or ugly or whatever, it's like, okay, who knighted you king of good taste or queen of good taste that you get to say that? Now, I'm trained as an architect. Do you think I'd care about aesthetics? I do. So talk about what matters, show examples of what matters, and help people produce value rather than letting somebody go all the way through a process and hijacking them at the end. So have a good design guideline. Just say this is the value of what we find. These are the architectures in our community that we find valuable. Help developers make things easier, and that reduces cost.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that I think it goes back to your recommendation: do the analysis, do the math, and then bring that information to bear on how things get built. So we have a question on housing, and I'm glad this question came up because I also, your analysis brought housing to top of mind for me. And the question is, how do we use this? And by I think this, it means the VPA framework of analysis, or value per acre, to create 40 units of workforce housing. How do we use this information to not have stress on the town? So are there lessons that we can tease out from this value per acre analysis that can help us communicate perhaps with our neighbors about the benefits of workforce housing, or maybe to help bust some myths about the costs of affordable or workforce housing?
Yeah, there's I don't have the presentation on this computer, but we have this video online where I analyze houses in poor Black neighborhoods against mansions in Palm Beach, the town of Palm Beach, and I show how they're more tax productive than Mar-a-Lago. You wouldn't think that, because no one does the math on it, because we look at the Mar-a-Lago tax bill and it's quite impressive. Then when you realize how big it is, it's not that productive at all. So when you make things apples to apples, and I would do the same with some houses in your community. You can find some dense little houses. I think we did this in Manchester. There was this house in the neighborhood that our client wouldn't even let our analyst get out of the car to take a picture. So she snapped a picture as she drove by. And this tiny little house built in the 1800s was more productive than houses on Scenic Drive, which you can imagine what those look like on Scenic Drive, And so just get past your biases, show people the data, and just say, here's what the data is. I mean, trust me, I get pushback all the time. And you have to be empathetic and understand that, okay, fine, push back on me, but I want to know what your data is. And you can be as emotional as you want with me, but I want to learn what's happening. So it's all of our jobs from a civic discussion standpoint to say, why are we not getting 40 units? How is that not happening? Is our development review process so onerous and ridiculous that nobody wants to build housing? Is it that hard? Is it the cost of land too much? Is the cost of the building permitting process too much? Is the cost of labor or construction too much? What are the costs in the marketplace that are going on? Have we made an artificial constraint from a zoning perspective where we've essentially made it so difficult to get housing through the system that people just aren't even trying? Because I can't figure out how to offer money on a piece of land. Sometimes it's It's land speculators, people that have been in the community forever that just refuse to sell. No one's putting a gun in anybody's head and saying, sell your land. Can't do that in this country, you know? But this is where Henry George comes in, where it's like, is the carrying cost so ridiculously low to waste real estate? Meanwhile, the pressures of the community go up, where we have needs that aren't being met because there isn't supply in the marketplace. So that's a subsidy, right? So is that the right subsidy to have in your community? And I'm gonna parlay this into a question that's in the chat box about Henry George, and back to that again. I'll give you a real life example of Henry George. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, adopted land value taxation in the 70s. So for those of us that remember the 70s or have heard stories of the 70s, in the 70s in most American cities, they started gutting themselves, Boston included. Manchester, you can see that, where they basically just leveled whole sections of neighborhoods and turned them into surface parking lots, ran highways out to suburbia, and sprawled to high heaven. This was particularly true in the Rust Belt cities like Pittsburgh and Cleveland, Syracuse, New York, Detroit. And what Pittsburgh did is they said, we're going to go ahead and change our land value taxation. It's real simple. If I have two buildings that are the same height and I tear one building down, my taxes have gone from this to this. The person with the building's paying high taxes. So it's actually stupid to keep a building around when you can't rent it out. So you knock it down, right? I pay lower taxes. Now what Pittsburgh did is they said, okay, everybody's paying the same tax level in this area of downtown. So if you knock your building down, you're still paying taxes up here, what everybody else is paying. So there was no incentive to tear buildings down. So Pittsburgh actually held on to the biggest stock of old buildings of any major American city because of the tax system. And they can thank Henry George for that. Now, when everything kind of returned to normal, they basically threw out their tax system and went back the other way. So now they're like the rest of us. But again, Pennsylvania has state enabling legislation that allows the community to pick and choose how they want to do their tax system. So the more tools that your state can enable you with, the more processes. If you have any creative ideas, you know, of ways to do things, at least get the enabling legislation passed so that you can choose that local tool if you want. So like in North Carolina, it's almost impossible to do tax increment financing. But our state has enabled us with this thing called synthetic TIF, because our state's really batshit poop crazy. And they don't like to name things the same way that they name things in South Carolina. It's come to that level in North Carolina. So we can't call it TIFs, they call it synthetic TIF. It's the same thing. But you know, you have to have this state enabling legislation.
In states that have enacted that legislation, I'm wondering why more communities haven't gone that route. Is it simply you know, fear of change? Is it you know, the politics of you know, who's the, you know, what the power dynamic might be in the community, or buy-in from the assessment community? I'm wondering why, you know, why haven't we seen more of a shift in states that have enacted that legislation?
Humans.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is we're humans.
Yeah.
We have a lot of bad habits. Sometimes professionals don't have the bandwidth to do this stuff. Sometimes politicians operate more out of fear. And it's not to say it's bad. It's just that this is how people behave. One of the things that we take a lot of pride in when we present, you all just sat through an hour presentation, probably about 200 slides of information. It's a lot of information. But I didn't use any words over a 6th grade level, and it's not to talk down to you. It's just to make the information as accessible as possible. What I find with a lot of these policies is they're written in gibberish. You know, you have to have like a team of attorneys kind of help you figure it out. And that's just not fair for small communities that don't have the bandwidth to figure out complex policy. At a state level, it's a disservice to those communities if they make things impossible. Locally, it's a disservice if we make our own processes difficult. And it's just it's our own devices. And if the community wants to choose to be difficult and obstinate and everything else, it's just going to calcify itself. So you know, it's just it's lots of things can change based on politics, the professionals, all the communities are different. And we just have to have faith and trust in each other to grow our communities well. But we always have to take more positive approaches toward looking at information, asking better questions, and we should demand that the information is equitably understandable. That's why we use pictures. You know, a picture's worth 1,000 words. You can see the information. So I would take that as a lesson going forward, is that out of respect to each other, to make the information, and it's a challenge to all the professionals at the other end of this, is that it's our job to make this stuff understandable to people. The most important picture in this entire presentation is that picture of my mother. She has a high school education and nothing more. And I can tell you, as a professional, I used to come home to my parents and drive them nuts with my questions about city planning and all this other stuff, and I would nerd out on them. And my poor mother, it's not that she's stupid. She was just like, okay, whatever. What do you want for dinner? Like, she just was paying no attention to me. And I realized I was the problem. I was the one that was nerding out about all this complex stuff and trying to educate her. And I realized I was miscommunicating. So, you know, it's our challenge professionally to make this stuff simple.
So that's where we should be workshopping our arguments, is with our moms, is what I'm
Yeah.
hearing.
If you
Yeah.
can't reach your mom, then you fail, not her. There's more moms out there than there are us. So mom's where you start.
Yeah, great. And just maybe to wrap things up with one more question, I'm wondering if you mentioned quite a few examples in your presentation, but I'm wondering, when you think about communities that you've worked with that have used this value per acre framework for analyzing their land use, does a particular example stand out where the community has seen that analysis and taken concrete actions to increase the fiscal productivity of their community?
Yeah, it is. I love this example because I love saying the city's name. It's called Rancho Cucamonga in California. Rancho Cucamonga is way out in the Inland Empire, way east of Los Angeles, out in the middle of like the sprawl zone. And they have a bunch of warehouses. And they're awesome people. We did a presentation to their joint city council and planning commission. And the mayor pro tem called me her favorite consultant ever. And it was because she was a junior high math teacher before she retired. So she's loved all the math. And she's like, we need more purple spikes. And like, that's how they talk now. They're like, we need more purple spikes. Now their downtown, I remember what I said about the ratios. Their downtown is a 1-to-6, or 1-to-4. So you saw the numbers I was giving about y'all. It's like Peterborough's a 1-to-30. Like they're not even like, I said, look, you need to be at least a 1-to-6. So that's what they're aiming for. Now they've kind of set their goal that they got to get to a 1-to-6. They at least have a place to shoot for. And so their economic development officer was telling me about the steel mill that came in, and it's the largest steel mill in their city. And who would have thought there's a steel mill in Southern California? And it's an important business. But he's like, you know, they came in and they said, look, we give you $6 million a year in retail taxes, and we're going to be leaving unless you give me something. And the economic development director did a value per acre analysis of the steel mill versus the value per acre analysis of a bunch of smaller manufacturing businesses and also employees per acre. And he found out that those smaller businesses were 10, 15 times the productivity in jobs and revenue. And so he told them, he's like, I'm sorry, I can't give you more money because you're just not good for us. And he told the steel mill basically, sayonara. And he's like, you know how hard that was? But once I did the analysis, it was so easy because I could see what was actually happening. So that's one of my favorite success stories. And that, you know, that they got it. So, and they may choose to keep the steel mill. They could have made that choice, but at least they're consciously doing that math and saying, is this good for us? Like I said, I eat pizza. I shouldn't be eating pizza, but I know when I have a slice of pizza, I'm going to exercise and go get a salad afterward. You know, I'm not going to like eat pizza every single day of the week. So you're going to have some stuff that isn't going to be great for you, but just keep it in its place and understand its relevance to your community.
Great, thanks. That's a great example of data giving staff the courage to make the right decision when it comes to policy. So
Yeah.
it's a great example. So I want to thank Joe again for a great presentation and his work with New Hampshire Housing. I want to thank New Hampshire Housing for sponsoring this event tonight, and thank all of you in the crowd tonight for tuning in. And this recording is being recorded, so for folks who weren't able to tune in tonight, this video will become a tool for bringing this value per acre framework of analysis to our communities in the Southwest region. So thanks again, everyone, and thank you, Joe, and everyone have a great evening. I think we're ready to wrap up.
Thanks. Take care.